Let me start with the most basic question. If we talk about a race between the United States and China right now in high tech, particularly involving these semiconductors, these chips, who's ahead and how far?
Well, today there's an international coalition of the US, Japan, the Netherlands, and Taiwan, all of whom produce technologies that are necessary for advanced chip making. The most advanced chips themselves are actually manufactured largely in Taiwan, which is multiple generations ahead, almost a decade ahead of the capabilities that the leading Chinese firms have.
When we talk about chips, one of the things that Secretary Raimondo emphasized, and we've heard it before from the administration, emphasized this week was we want to separate national security concerns from basic commercial concerns in our competition with China. Is that doable when we're talking about these very, very high-end, cutting-edge chips?
Well, there are certain types of chips that are only used in civilian or only used in military applications. But when you're looking at the chips that are used for training AI systems, they're used in both. The exact same type of chip that can train a car to drive autonomously can also be used to train a drone to fly autonomously. There's just no technological way of differentiating. And that's why the US controls on the transfer of AI chips to China are going to have both a military but also a civilian and commercial impact.
So in your book, you talk about the history in the United States and elsewhere of a relationship between the military on the one hand and development of semiconductors on the other. We now are talking about AI all the time, whether it's civilian or military. How much of this competition over semiconductors really is turning into an issue of generative large language artificial intelligence?
You know, every military in the world, every intelligence agency, they're all trying to understand how they can better apply AI and autonomous systems to defense and intelligence uses. Now, most AI is going to end up in the civilian sphere, but we can't underestimate the extent to which, whether it's autonomous drones or better intelligence systems, they're already beginning to rely on AI, which means they already require advanced chips to train them to act more intelligently.
So, Chris, you say that we may be as much as a generation, which is maybe as much as a decade, maybe a little less ahead right now of China. Can we preserve that lead? I mean, those of us who remember sort of the Cold War remember thinking that maybe the Soviet Union could never get an atomic bomb. They came up with it pretty quickly.
Well, there's two aspects to preserving the lead. One is racing faster than the Chinese, which we've historically been pretty good at doing alongside the Taiwanese, the Netherlands, the Japanese. And if you look at all of the R&D money that the West is pouring into its chip industry, it's substantial, and it's kept a really dramatic lead over the past couple of decades. But China has been catching up over the past several years, pouring lots and lots of state subsidies into its industry. And that's why the US, Japan, and the Netherlands in particular have tightened up their export controls on chip making tools, which now can no longer be transferred to China to help China produce cutting edge chips. And so the second prong of the strategy, holding China back, has taken on more prominence in recent years.
So those chip building machines, again, I learned from your book, the lithography machines, right, that seem very, very sophisticated, very high end. And as you say, there are restrictions now placed on the ability for Western countries to export those into China. Can't China reverse engineer and make their own lithography machines?
Well, chip making tools are really the most complex tools that humans have ever made. If you look at the most advanced lithography systems, which are produced just by one company, ASML in the Netherlands, these have hundreds of thousands of components inside of them, including the flattest mirrors humans have ever made, one of the most powerful lasers ever deployed in a commercial device, and an explosion happening constantly inside of them at a temperature of around 40 times the surface of the sun. So this is really extraordinarily complex engineering. And even if you copied all of the files, you can't simply paste it into your computer and hope to replicate it straightforwardly. And the other facet is these machines are getting better and better on a regular basis. ASML is already preparing in the next year or two to release an even more capable lithography system. So again, copying the last system is not a great strategy for technological catch-up.
So far, we've been talking about export restrictions, other restrictions to keep China from catching up. What about attempts to really build up the capability of the United States and other Western countries? And let's talk specifically about the Chips and Science Act, because that was billed as something that we needed to do so that we had our own homegrown. How realistic is that we can, through the Chips and Science Act and other activities, build up our capacity here to match, for example, what we're seeing with TSMC over in Taiwan?
Well, the US is never going to be independent in semiconductors because the supply chain is just too interrelated with Taiwan, with Japan, with Europe. But the goal of the Chips and Science Act is to put more money behind equalizing the cost of producing chips in the US relative to other places in Asia.